Hey everyone, I know it's been a little while since I've made a video. I am working on a creative project throughout February. I hope to share that with you, or parts of that with you, in March. But I want to talk today about Becoming Led Zeppelin, the Led Zeppelin documentary that's currently playing in movie theaters and hopefully still is for a little while after you see this. I had pretty low expectations going in. First of all, I didn't think that Becoming Led Zeppelin, when it was first announced, I didn't think it was going to play in the movie theaters. I thought it was going to be like some straight to Netflix or Prime Video or Hulu or one of those type of documentaries. So I was a little surprised to see that it was playing in the movie theater. I think one of the things that kind of turned me off about it at first was learning early on that it was only going to focus on these two records, the Led Zeppelin 1, first one, and Led Zeppelin 2, the follow up. But I went in with a pretty open mind. I'd heard some good things, but hadn't really read too many reviews and hadn't watched any videos yet on the vinyl community or music channels in general on YouTube about it. And I really enjoyed it. And there, yes, I guess there's some spoiler alerts in this. Spoiler alert: they did break up eventually, although they don't even get into that in the movie because again, it is about the first two records. I liked it quite a bit. I really appreciated getting all the background information. Like, I knew that Jimmy Page and John Paul Jones were session musicians. I had no idea that they started so young, especially Page. I mean, I don't know, he's like 10, 11, 12. I mean, and he's working on these major records, these pop singles of the day. They played some rare things that he worked on. I found myself wishing that they had shown more of Jimmy Page when he's working on mainstream rock records. I mean, he worked on Kinks records and Who records. And I mean, he said that his one regret was that he didn't get to work on a Beatles record, but it seemed like he worked on everything else. He was like a go-to session musician. And it's kind of too bad they don't share those moments, but I can kind of understand why they wouldn't either bother getting the licensing or why the licensing wasn't obtained by the likes of the Who and the Kinks, because who wants to show that hey, that wasn't actually our guitar player, that was Jimmy Page doing that kind of work. I mean, they're session musicians and usually uncredited to some extent for that reason. But we got to see Jimmy Page playing on a lot more obscure things, which was really cool. And he apparently just bounced from session to session and talked about how it just had to be perfect the first time or you might not get work again. I mean, really, they worked so quickly back in those days, just churning stuff out. And same thing with John Paul Jones. I mean, he started out as a session musician too and was pretty in demand. Accidentally talked himself into scoring some music, orchestra type stuff at one point too. But both of them were kind of growing tired of that kind of work, especially Jimmy Page. He, when he got invited to join the Yardbirds, he jumped at the chance. Of course, as soon as he joins, Eric Clapton leaves, and it's all of a sudden he's a lead guitar player. It's not quite as exciting as he thought it would be because all the pressure is on just to make singles. He never cared for that stuff. He says as much in the movie, which made me feel okay with never really getting the Yardbirds. Maybe he likes some of it, but he definitely talks about cranking out singles and just not wanting to do that. Of course, we meet Robert Plant playing in club bands, really not having a good relationship with his parents at all. It was either be an accountant or follow music, and if you followed music, you weren't going to live in the house. And there's definitely some I think it's definitely some trauma, for lack of a better word, that happened there, and I think that's part of the reason why Robert Plant has become or was such a nomad and a traveler and a roamer from country to country and city to city. I know he's lived in several cities in his adult life, even post Zeppelin. But yeah, and then of course we meet John Bonham. One of the nice surprises about that is they unearthed a 1980 interview with John Bonham that nobody had heard before, at least the public, and they played that interspersed with somewhat modern interviews with the three remaining members. I swear I'd seen some of that footage before of the interviews. My guess is it wasn't done super recently. I mean, maybe it was done 5 to 10 years ago. I have no idea. I mean, clearly it's the filmmakers that are interviewing them because they show them actual footage and they comment on it. But that was super cool to see them all interviewed and being pretty open about these first two records. So great footage. excellent footage, some stuff that had never really been seen before, even by members. They were showing them some footage and having them react, which was really cool to see. On a killer, digital theater surround sound, whatever you want to call it. I don't know, Atmos, I guess, sound system. It did sound pretty intense. I didn't see the IMAX Max version. I have a little problem with IMAX, and that is the volume is cranked up way, way too high for my liking. And it was plenty high just in the regular movie. I saw a movie version, theater version of this movie, Becoming Led Zeppelin. So what did I learn? Besides the background on the performers, one of the things that I really liked learning about was the fact that Jimmy Page wanted to make a record, an album. He was tired of doing singles. That's all he had really done, session work, and then continuing to the Yardbirds. Record labels would want a single, and he would have to write some poppy thing or record some poppy thing he didn't really care for just to try to get on the radio. When he formed Led Zeppelin, or what became Led Zeppelin, the main thing he wanted to do was make a record, make an album, a statement in an album, not an individual song. So much so that he didn't have any singles released intentionally off the first record. And you never think of Led Zeppelin as being a singles band at all, really. So with the first record, that's what he wanted, and he spent his time on it. I didn't realize that they self-financed the whole thing, so they put their money. I'm guessing I think it was John Paul Jones and Jimmy Page, because I know they had to convince Bonham to join the band. Bonham's wife was not a fan of Robert Plant. Robert Plant was kind of a troublemaker that got John Bonham in some trouble sometimes. So Bonham's wife was not too keen on him working with Robert Plant, which is kind of a funny part of the story. And they get into that quite a bit, showing some archival images of Robert Plant being arrested in the newspaper and stuff like that. But his intention was to make a record. He recruited all 4 members. They did end up paying John Bonham some kind of salary to convince him to come and join the band. And it seemed like there was magic from day one. They talk about it. They talk about being in this room and playing these songs together, and just feeling it and knowing they had something really, really special. And they captured that for sure on the first record. It's a little light on their own tunes, definitely some covers on it. When I was in my mid-20s, I played a ton. I played it a ton. And a lot of times late at night, it was my go-to Friday night, Saturday night. I don't know. Putting it on, it was a really nice kind of late night record. And I haven't listened to it intently in quite a few years now, but the second record, the idea behind that one was to really have John Bonham's drums be a soundstage for it, kind of extending across the whole listening field, and then having individual members' parts really pop. And I must say, when I bought this on vinyl a few years ago, and having not heard Led Zeppelin 2 in a long, long time, some of these records I just played too much, and you get turned on other things and you feel like you know it in your head. So it's I wasn't in a big hurry to go out and play Led Zeppelin 2 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 5 years ago. But I picked it up on vinyl and I put it on, and it blew me away, partially because I hadn't heard it in so long, but also because I heard what Jimmy Page intended to do. I heard that sound field. I heard individual parts quite clearly, and John Bonham's drums and the whole stereo field, and it just, the intensity of it completely blew me away. And he talks about that. He talks about just really getting exactly what he wanted on Led Zeppelin 2. Of course, this is when they start writing their songs together more. There's less reliance on covers. You start to see more acoustic elements come in. And they talk about all of that. And then they talk about the touring. Talk about how, this was interesting too, about how they were big in America and they toured America, and the first one was out in America, but then they come back to the UK and they're like, we couldn't even tell our friends because they would think we were lying. The record wasn't out in the UK. None of their family really knew, extended family anyway, knew what they were doing, how big they were in America. And it would take Led Zeppelin 2 coming out, another tour of America, and then coming back to the UK, which is kind of partially how they structure the film, for family members and friends to really see, and for UK in general to catch on to what Led Zeppelin was. I thought that was really interesting. I mean, it seems like now music, I mean, you release anything, you release something in Africa and you can hear it the next day anywhere, right? And put it on streaming services, whatever. But quite a bit different back then when you had different versions in US and UK. I think these were the same versions. I don't think it was like the Beatles or different songs were on different UK versus US records. But it's crazy that Led Zeppelin, this record, probably was out in the US for close to a year, I think, before it was out in the UK. So that was really cool. Just the stories from the road, the stories about leaving the UK, feeling like kind of like you had no home in a way, but loving it at the same time and realizing that you had joined this beast of a thing called Led Zeppelin. Now, when I first heard about this movie, I thought that I was disappointed. I'm like, why don't you do the whole thing? I like the first two records. I'm like, that's not even where it's interesting to me. Like, what's interesting to me is more like 3 and 4 and House of the Holy, like that sweet spot in the middle when they're writing like killer songs and trying new things and really becoming the Led Zeppelin that I think most of us know or appreciate. My favorite record by them is House of the Holy, so obviously I'm a little biased there. But they did such a good job just with the first two records, and they were able to go in depth with them over 2 hours. The movie was not short. And I went in thinking, I wonder if there are sequels in the works. You know, would they just show the two records? Are they going to kind of sum this up? Like, okay, that's it. You know, that's how we became Led Zeppelin, end of story. And that would be like the definitive documentary. When I saw it, my first thought when it ended is no, because it didn't have this feeling of completion. It felt very much like part one in a continuing saga of movies. I hope I'm right. I think I probably am. My guess is that they did all these interviews with the three of them and covered their whole career, every bit of it, and will probably use them over the next few years to develop. You know, I'm thinking my guess is that it might be a trilogy. You know, I think you could cover three, 4. Sometimes I say 5 for House of the Holy. Cover those records in part 2, and then get into Physical Graffiti through the Outdoor and Bonham's Death and all that in the last one. I'm hoping that will happen because these were really well done. It was really cool to see it in the theater. You learn a ton about it. It made me appreciate them even more. And yeah, the 2 hours kind of flew by. Now, I don't know if you were to drag somebody who's not into Led Zeppelin at all to this movie. I don't know. If you're standing ready to purchase tickets and the Dylan biopic is playing at the same time, I would probably steer you towards that. I think it is a much better movie. I think it's more moving as far as a movie goes about music. But this is a documentary, and there is a difference there. And it is a really well done documentary, and I do hope to see other parts. So, Becoming Led Zeppelin, go check it out. I mean, the archival material alone, just seeing that and hearing a whole lot of love while Jimmy Page talks about the different elements and how he wanted that soundstage to be is pretty powerful too. And I happen to love those members. One of the highlights of the movie that was a little surprising for me was I feel like now I know John Paul Jones. I mean, he was interviewed as much as Jimmy Page and Robert Plant, and he's always kind of been the quiet one. He's always been the one standing in the background. I remember when I saw Song Remains the Same when I was a kid, or bought the tape. I wasn't lucky enough to see it in the theater. I'm not that old. But I was like, wow, who is this guy? Because he's so in the background playing bass or playing keyboards, and he just seems like so boring compared to, of course, Robert Plant and Jimmy Page. But when you see him interviewed, I just gained a whole new respect for him. Not only as a session musician, somebody who scores records, somebody who, he worked on some great records like Automatic for the People by R.E.M. He did the scores, the strings were under John Paul Jones' direction. I mean, he was in Them Crooked Vultures more recently. But I really felt like I got to know him and really appreciate him and really like him. So that was a nice surprise. Yeah, so the four members, including John Bonham, came alive much more for me than they had before. And I really enjoyed being told by their point of view. Yeah, you're not getting all the scandalous stories, but this is like how they want to tell their story, and they should be allowed to, and I hope that they continue to do the same kind of take with future films. So, Becoming Led Zeppelin. Thanks, everyone.